did everyone receive the packet when you walked in?
Back on. Okay. Just in case somebody happens to come in, why don't you go ahead and take those? Do you have some pens over that way?
I do.
Okay. You know what I do sometimes when people are slow about coming back in is I threaten them that if they don't come back in, I'm going to start singing. And I tell them that not only do I threaten them that I'm going to start singing, and that's going to hurt their ears, but I also tell them I know Barry Manilow tunes. My wife and I used to love Barry Manilow, and my favorite song that he sung was I Can't Smile Without You. And so I tell people, if you don't get back on time, I'm going to sing me a verse of I Can't Smile Without You. And your ears are going to be pained because of that. Hey, while people are coming back in, let me share with you this guy's prayer. This guy was praying, and he said, Lord, I've been doing okay. I haven't gossiped. I haven't lost my temper. I haven't been greedy, grumpy, nasty, selfish, or overindulgent. And I'm very thankful for that. But in a few minutes, I'm fixing to get up out of bed. And from then on, I'm going to need a lot of help. Be with me, Lord. Amen. Oh, let me tell you, while people are slowly coming back, let me tell you the story about this guy who forgot his silver wedding anniversary. Now, for you men, that's 25 years, silver wedding anniversary. I know us men are kind of slow about things, but this guy forgot his 25th wedding anniversary. It was getting toward the evening of that date, and his wife just blew up on him, and she just couldn't believe that he had forgotten their 25th wedding anniversary. So she started stomping upstairs at the end of the day. And as she was stomping up the stairs, she said, I've been married to you for a quarter of a century. I've washed your clothes. I've raised the kids. I've taken care of the home. I've supplemented our income. We're married 25 years now, and you forgot our anniversary. She said in the morning, there better be something out there in the driveway that's red and goes from 0 to 200 in 6 seconds. Well, that night they did not sleep in the same bedroom. And the next morning, she got up and she looked out the upstairs window. And there was a little box out there in the driveway that was red, that was wrapped in a white ribbon. And she was excited. She ran down the stairs and she went to the driveway and she opened the box and she just knew what was going to be there, but it wasn't what she expected. What was there was a set of red bathroom scales that could go from 0 to 200 in less than 6 seconds. And they still have not found that husband. They're still looking for him. Us men need to be really careful when it comes to anniversaries. Yeah. Jerry said she must have hid the body really good. Yeah. Oh, okay. While we may still have a couple more coming in, I want to begin this session with sharing with you something about the ministry that I have, and I'll just do this briefly. The baby that became my wife was born in 1952 in Dover, Ohio. That's Tuscarawas County, for those of you who may not be aware of that. That's the county south of Canton, Ohio, south of Stark County. And we were married for 41 years. We got married when we were 19 years old. And it was a good ride. It was a really good ride. We were blessed with 3 daughters, and they were all raised right. Notice they all are Ohio State University Buckeye fans. And we enjoy that trivial thing every season. We love the Buckeyes. We were also blessed with 5 grandchildren. This picture was taken where my wife is buried in the same city where she was born, the same city where she graduated from high school, on a hill in Dover, Ohio. And this picture was taken about 18 months after she was buried there. Now, can you imagine being so bodily afflicted that when you have a small granddaughter of yours laid in the hospital bed that you're laying in your house, that you don't even have the ability to raise your arms to hug that child? Have you ever thought, talking about counting your blessings, have you ever thanked the Lord for the ability to hug? That is such a wonderful blessing to be able to hug and to be hugged. But have you ever thanked the Lord for the ability to hug? My wife lost the ability to hug. Parkinson's disease is an awful affliction, neurological disease that just typically is not life-threatening, but it is definitely life-altering, and it changed our life greatly. One of the things that it's caused me to reflect on is how many things that I've experienced in my life that I never thought a moment to thank the Lord for. Like when she lost the ability to get up out of a chair by herself. Have you ever thanked the Lord for that ability? When she lost the ability to walk, even with a walker, have you ever thanked the Lord for the ability to walk? She lost the ability to go to the bathroom by herself, to take care of herself, to take a shower by herself. She had to help with all of that. She lost the ability to eat. Have you ever, I know you thank the Lord for the food, have you ever thanked the Lord for the ability to eat? And she also lost the ability to talk. Have you ever thanked the Lord for the ability to talk? She lost all of those things before I lost her as my wife. It was on Christmas morning of 2013 that I was on her right side and saw her draw her last breath. And it was then that I began my journey as a widower. And I struggled big time. What I did after trying to find some help for folks who were struggling, and especially people who had lost their spouses, and I found virtually no ministries to help people who had lost their spouses. I thought, why can't I do that? Why can't I start that? Why can't my family start that? The Widowhood Workshop Ministry is my family's passion project. This is a picture of my family. My 3 daughters, my 3 sons-in-law, my 5 grandchildren are all a part of the Widowhood Workshop Ministry team, and they all have responsibilities. If you go to the website, that website is monitored. It was established and monitored by my son-in-law. If you go to our public Facebook page, Widowhood Workshop Ministry, that was created by one of my daughters. The finances of the ministry are taken care of by my oldest daughter, the one I told you about, whose husband left her when she was 29 years old. She's an accountant by trade, and so she takes care of the ministry's finances. Every year, we have a widowhood retreat. In July, we invite all widowed people from all across the country to come to Middle Tennessee and enjoy a weekend with us. My family hosts a widowhood retreat. Now, we have marriage retreats. We have singles retreats. We have youth meetings and youth rallies for the kids. Why don't we have a widowhood retreat in the church? And so we started that. This coming July will be the 7th year that we've hosted that event. This picture was taken last year in July at that event. And my grandchildren are the ones who serve the widowed people who come. They are the servers, and they are participating in the Widowhood Workshop Ministry in that way. Last year in July, we had 158 widowed people from 15 different states that came to Laverne, Tennessee, south of Nashville, and enjoyed a weekend with us. And that is how the Widowhood Workshop Ministry got started. We are willing to go and conduct workshops like this anywhere. We've gone to places that were so small and so financially strapped that they couldn't give us a dime, but we went and helped them anyway. We went to Mayhill, New Mexico, which is in southeast New Mexico, 2 hours north of El Paso, Texas. That church on Sunday morning had 44 people there. We spent 8 days there, me and another widower. We spent 8 days there working with that church and trying to get them more connected with the community. And we did a Living with Loss workshop there at that particular church, and they couldn't give us a dime. We didn't expect that. But we go anywhere that we can to try to help churches learn about grief and help them reach out to their communities with help with people who are struggling with losses. So that's what the Widowhood Workshop Ministry is all about. It's called Widowhood Workshop Ministry because widowhood is typically the biggest struggle that people have after loss. It's, for most people, not everybody, but for most people, the greatest loss that they'll experience in their life is the loss of their wife or their husband. And that's why the ministry is called Widowhood Workshop. But we talk about grief generally, but we make it a point of talking a little bit, especially emphasizing the loss of a spouse. Now, statistically, I want to talk to you about widowhood because what we're going to get to is we're going to get to basically two things: passion for God and compassion for people. But we're going to do that by talking about widowhood. Now, statistically, the widowed are a minority in our country, about 6%. But when it comes to 65 years and older in our country, well over a third of the women 65 years and older are widowed, 12% of the men. Now, if you go down to 55 years and older, almost a third of the women 55 years and older are widowed, 9% of the men. Now, you may be wondering, why in the world is there more widowed females than widowed males? Way more. Well, there's two reasons for that. Fact number one is the lifespan of a woman is longer than the lifespan of a man. Now, the only explanation I have for that is us guys take care of you girls so good, you live longer than we do. That's the only way I could possibly explain that. But it is a fact, women live longer than men. Now, here's another fact. Women have a tendency, not all women, but more often than not, women marry men who are older than they are. That's your fault. That's the woman's fault. So, the woman living longer than the man, that's the man's fault. Okay? But women marrying older men, you see, if the lifespan of a woman is longer than the lifespan of a man, and then a woman marries a man who's older than she is, she's far more likely to be widowed than he is. That's why we have way more widowed females than widowed males. Now, you may be wondering about Dayton, Ohio. I've done my research. There is a website called censusreporter.org. You can go to it, you can plug in a county or city, and you can find out all kinds of interesting information. Dayton, Ohio, population 137,000. Dayton, Ohio. There are 63,000 households. 63,000 households in Dayton. Now, we're not talking about the suburbs. We're not talking about Huber Heights or anything like that. We're talking about Dayton. Okay? 63,000 households. By the way, 25% of the households in Dayton are female householders. Now, what that means is there's no adult male living in that house. That's interesting. Now, if you were to get all the women 15 years and older in Dayton, Ohio together, now I don't know why the Census Bureau thinks that 15-year-olds are adults, but that's what they do. They count 15 years and older as an adult. That's the Census Bureau. If you were to get all the women 15 years and older in Dayton, Ohio together, 6% of them are widowed. Now imagine how much higher that percentage would be if we could get all the women together who were 20 years and older. I hope those girls who are 15, 16, 17 years, they're not even married. So they're not even at risk of being widowed. So if it was 20 years and older, that 6% would be way higher. But, okay, 6% of the females 15 years and older are widowed. Now, if you guesstimate that of the 137,000 total population, at least 50,000 of them are females 15 years and older. That's a lowball estimate. That means that there are at least 3,000 widowed females in Dayton, Ohio. Likely many more than that, at least 3,000. The men are 3%. 3% of the men 15 years and older are widowed. That means that there are at least 1,500 men who are widowed in Dayton, Ohio. Bottom line is, in Dayton, Ohio, you're talking about at least 4,500 widowed people in Dayton, Ohio. Now, here's my question. Who's ministering to those 4,500 plus widowed males and females in Dayton, Ohio? I think it would be really good for the Lord's church in every community to be known as the church in that city or in that county that ministers to the widowed. That's one thing that my family is doing. We're helping churches start local, ongoing widowhood ministries. The East High Street Church in Springfield, Ohio, has such a program. As a matter of fact, now they're having about 25, sometimes even more, every month who get together. And more of them are from the community than from the Lord's church. They're reaching out to the community in a compassionate way, and they're basically telling the widowed people in their community, we care about you. Now, when we can do that, what we're doing is we're introducing people to Jesus and his church. And there are churches who are having conversions to the Lord because they have a local widowhood ministry, and they're reaching out to their communities with those ministries. So I try to encourage churches to use a widowhood ministry as an outreach to their community. Now, we're talking about in the neighborhood of 12 million women and maybe 3 to 4 million widowed men, and we're talking about over 15 million widowed people in the United States, and I just wonder who's ministering to those people. Why can't we be the ones in the church ministering to those people? Because those folks are dealing with a life that's very difficult because they've lost their most precious human relationship in their life. You talk about grief and struggling with life after loss. That is struggling with life after loss on steroids. Now, we're talking about over 1 million people every year losing their spouse. What's interesting is it's unbelievable how many of those are younger people. The most inspiring people I've met since I've started this ministry is young women in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who've lost their spouses. I wish that we could all get together, and I'd love to take you to see and visit with some people. I could take you, for instance, down to Salina, Tennessee, and I could introduce you to Emily. Emily, at 34 years old, was awakened one morning by her 36-year-old husband having a heart attack. She knew she needed a hard surface, so she pulled his body off onto the floor. She started giving him CPR. A few days later, she posted on Facebook a video, the most touching video I've ever seen posted on Facebook. You know what I heard on that video? Beep, beep, beep. You know what I saw in that video? I saw his body being pushed down a hallway. And that hallway was lined with medical workers on both sides who were standing in reverence, honoring him as he was being taken to an operating room for his organs to be harvested. He died. 36. Emily, a sister in the Lord, widowed at age 34. They had a child. Her name is Evie, and Evie was about first grade at that time in her life. Emily is one amazing woman. I could take you down to southwestern Georgia. I could introduce you to Buffy. Buffy is a teacher, and every day at work, at lunch, called her husband and talked to him. And this one day, she hung up, and she didn't like that conversation. She was concerned. She went to her car and drove home, but the problem was it was 45 minutes to drive home. And on the way home, she called her dad. She said, "Dad, did you go to the house? I'm concerned about him." And it was a good thing that her dad got there first, because he had committed suicide. She was in her 20s. They had a child, a little over a year old. I could take you to see Brittany in West Tennessee, and Brittany was married to Bradford. And Bradford was a guy who was academically qualified to help children. He was up in Trenton, Tennessee, in West Tennessee, and he was in an awful car accident, and he died. They were married for 1,300 days. The reason I know they were married for 1,300 days is she wrote a blog after Bradford died in that accident. She went and got up that morning, and she was married. And before the sun went down that day, she was widowed. Again, in her 20s. Man, life is not fair. Sometimes life is way more than unfair. It's brutal and it's cruel. You don't have to be old to be widowed. You would be surprised how many people are widowed in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. The average age of a woman in our country when she's widowed, the average age of a woman when she's widowed in this country isn't in her 70s. It's not even in her 60s. It's 57. 57 is the average age of a woman when she's first widowed in this country. 75% of the married women in our country are going to experience widowhood. That's why we need to be talking about this, studying about this, and understanding more about it before we experience it. Do you know who is the most important person to come to a Living with Loss workshop? It's people who are married. Because those are the people, the only people who are at risk of being widowed are people who are married. And when you've lost your mate, you've lost the most precious human relationship in your life. And it's good to know more about it before it happens. 78% of the widowed are females. Most of the research done in regard to widowhood is done with the female perspective because there's way more of them than there are of people like me that are men. There are 245 million widowed women in this world. 115 million of them live in abject poverty. China has the most widowed females of any nation on planet Earth, 44 million. India is second. They have 43 million plus widowed females. The most awful thing I've ever read about widowhood is in the National Geographic magazine, February of 2017. This particular edition of the National Geographic magazine has an article in it about widowed females in India. I couldn't believe that people in our day and age could be treated like the females in India are treated. The reason I bring that up is whenever we support foreign mission works, one of the things that we need to be talking to these foreign missionaries about is about ministering to the widowed in their mission work, because that is a great way of compassionately introducing people to Jesus and His church and help them to understand their need for the Lord. Now, I'm going to ask you to think out loud with me together. On the screen, you see three things, and there's more than that, but here's three. I limited it to three. Three things that God says about Himself in regard to the widowed. He claims to be a defender, a reliever, and a protector of the widowed. Now, what does that say about God and the widowed? Anybody? He what? He's concerned about them. Okay? Why would he be concerned about them? Why does he specifically mention them? Why is he concerned about them? Because so many, okay, what else? Why would he be concerned for them? Why didn't he just say, hey, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. Go get yourself married again. Okay, they needed protection. They needed help. They're vulnerable, and they're living a uniquely challenging life. Now, the life of a widowed person now is different from the life of a widowed person back then. But we're vulnerable and needy in a different way now. We live in a different culture, obviously. But Jesus, his Father in heaven, concerned about people who are living uniquely difficult lives. Now, when you're concerned about people who are living difficult lives, what is that? It's compassion. God has compassion for people who are struggling with their life. In a broken world, there are a lot of people who are struggling with difficulties. There are people who are having difficulties because of their marriage. There are people who are stressed and deeply worried about their marriages. We have a lot of dysfunctional families. There are people who are struggling with unique difficulties because of their dysfunctional family. There are people who are struggling because of their physical health. There are all kinds of ways that we struggle in our life. What we need to keep reminding ourselves of is God is a compassionate God. He knows, he cares. When you know and you have compassion, that results in effective ministry. Now, how does God defend, relieve, and protect the widowed? How does he do that? Now, doesn't his word help in that way a lot? You know, when we read and we internalize the things that God has shared with us, this is the mind of God that I'm holding in my hand. But this book provides so much defense and relief and protection. But how about more than that? Outside of the Bible, how does God serve as a reliever, protector, and defender of the widow? Through us. We're God's huggers. We're God's servants. Now, I've not been in a group of Christians where I've heard this song sung for years. Now, I remember when I first started going to church, when I was a kid, I did hear this song sung on occasion. It's called The World's Bible. Let me read to you the first verse of the lyrics of this song. Christ has no hands, but our hands. He has no feet, but our feet to lead men in his way. He has no tongue, but our tongues to tell men how he died. He has no help, but our help to bring them to his side. Now, are we going to participate in assisting the widowed, in being the help that God wants us to be if we don't know what they're going through? If you don't know what somebody is going through, how can you help them? You know, if you had somebody in your life that was an alcoholic, and you've never been an alcoholic, you've never had a problem with alcohol or liquor, how are you going to be able to minister to them if you are clueless about what they're going through? Well, you need to learn about what it's like. You can go to the library and you can get books, resources about alcoholism and about what that's like. You could ask permission to attend an AA meeting and you could hear them talk about their struggle. You could go online and you can find articles about the life of an alcoholic. See, there are ways that you can learn. You don't have to be an alcoholic to be able to serve and help an alcoholic in ways that God would be really proud of us. The same thing is true about folks who suffered great loss. We can study about it. We don't have to have experienced it. We can learn about it, and then we can implement things that can help us to be good servants of other people who are struggling with difficult times in their life. Now, the wicked don't care. The wicked don't have compassion. As a matter of fact, in Psalm Psalm 94 in particular, it says the wicked slay the widow. See, that's the direct opposite of assisting. They're actually being brutal with the widow. Job was accused by one of his friends. Man, Job, you're suffering so bad, I'll bet you've even sent widows away empty. What's interesting about that accusation is that in chapter 29, he says that's not the case. He said, I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. He had been a blessing to the widowed people. He knew that that was close to the heart of God. Now, in Deuteronomy chapter 24, there's a passage that I think is worth reading. And if you have a Bible, you might want to follow along. But Deuteronomy chapter 24, beginning in verse 17, I want to read this passage. Because in this passage, and let's make sure we set the context here. In this passage, there is a powerful message. Now, the Israelites are at the Jordan River. They're going to be crossing the Jordan River. They're going to be going into the land of Canaan. And their job is going to be driving out the wicked people in the land of Canaan. Because the land of Canaan is the promised land. But at this point, God doesn't tell Moses to tell the people about engaging in military battle. He tells them about two things. Here's how I want you to be, and here's how I want you to behave. Watch how he talks about what's really important to God at this critical time in Israel's history. Verse 17, Deuteronomy 24. You shall not pervert justice, do the stranger or the fatherless, nor take a widow's garment as a pledge. Now, there are three life circumstances mentioned there. It says stranger, fatherless, widow. Now, what do all three of those have in common? What is the common thread that ties those three life circumstances together? Okay, they've all got issues, don't they? They've all got problems. They've got a trouble. They've got a trial that they're having to deal with. They're living a uniquely challenging life, right? Now, look at what he says about them. He says, do not pervert justice, do them. Now, he starts getting specific in verse 18. But you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore, I command you to do this thing. When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back and get it. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not glean it afterward. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I command you to do this thing. Why does he mention twice about when they were in the land of Egypt? Why does he bring that up? What does that have to do with not perverting the justice, do the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow? Why does he bring up the land of Egypt? What was it like for them in Egypt? Reminding them about what they had gone through. They had a terrible life circumstance. They cried out to God. God heard their cries. God responded compassionately. 10 terrible things had to happen, but finally they got out of the land of Egypt. God responded compassionately when they were in great need. Now he's saying, you do the same thing. I did that for you. Now you do that for others. You see what God is teaching his people? I want you to be compassionate. And here's how I want you to be compassionate. I want you to be actively compassionate. When you're harvesting, don't take every speck. Don't go back and think you have to get every single grape. You leave that because there are people in need, and you need to compassionately serve them. Now, I'm not of the mindset to think that God was only saying the foreigner and the widow and the fatherless. Now, the rest of the people who need help, you neglect them. He wasn't saying that. This is what's called in the English, I don't know, in English class, I don't know if you were sleeping or awake, but in English class, an English teacher will talk about a synecdoche. That's a part standing for a whole. It's like ranchers out in Texas when they're talking about their herds and they're talking about their cows or horses they have. they'll say something like, well, how many head do you have? Well, he's not just talking about how many heads do you have. He's talking about how many cows you have, whole cows. But they use the term head. See, that's a part standing for a whole. When he's talking about the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, he's talking about people in need. He's suggesting, hey, be the kind of people that when you become aware of people in need, you make sure that you do what you can to help them. And that's the point that he's trying to make. That's the way he wanted Israel to be. Now, in Isaiah chapter 1, we don't have time to look at this, but in Isaiah chapter 1, the sad thing is they didn't listen. And God sent them Isaiah the prophet. And Isaiah the prophet in Isaiah chapter 1 basically says, look, y'all are observing the Sabbath. You are offering your sacrifices. You're paying your tithes. But he says, I'm sick and tired of it, and it's not acceptable worship because you have become a sinful nation. You're like Sodom and Gomorrah. And one of the things he tells them to do, when he tells them, you got to clean up your act, one of the things he tells them, you need to start pleading for the widowed. Twice in Isaiah chapter 1, he mentions the widowed, and he says, you have neglected the widowed. See, he told them how he wanted them to be and how he wanted them to behave in Deuteronomy 24, but they didn't listen, and it negated their worship. Their worship wasn't acceptable to God because they were not actively compassionate. Now, do you think God would want us to be like the Israelites? Or would he want us to be better than the Israelites? Well, when Jesus came on the scene, there were people, even the Jewish leaders, who were not ministering to the needy. They were actually taking advantage of them. And Jesus accused the Jewish leaders of devouring widows' houses, taking advantage of them. And then, in Acts chapter 6 and verse 1, we read about the neglect of the widow. Now, in Acts chapter 6 and verse 1, I'm going to read you this passage, but I want to set the stage before I read it to help you appreciate the point that I'm going to make. Acts chapter 6 is preceded by Acts chapter 2. Now, in Acts chapter 2, that's when the church is born. The Holy Spirit comes with power. The gospel is preached. People become Christians. Thousands of people become Christians. Now, these people had come to Jerusalem from all over the inhabited world for the day of Pentecost. It was a natural, normal, annual thing. So they made their trip, and they had a time they were going to leave and a time they came back, and they've been doing this for years. Now, have you ever made a trip and got stuck somewhere because something happened? Somebody got sick, or you had a car problem, and you ended up having to stay somewhere longer than you anticipated? Now, that's what happened in Acts chapter 2. They had no clue that they were going to end up staying in Jerusalem as long as they were going to stay there. They thought this was a normal year for them to do their yearly thing. Well, God had different plans. So the church is born, they become Christians, and they stay in Jerusalem way longer than they anticipated. Now, they hadn't brought enough toothpaste, enough soap. They hadn't brought enough food. Now, imagine the problem that they had in Jerusalem when thousands upon thousands of people came there, and they're staying there way longer than they anticipated. Do you think that they had problems? It's called logistics. They had, no doubt, had all kinds of logistical problems ministering to those people who were staying there a lot longer than they had planned. But there's no mention of that until you get to Acts chapter 6, verse 1. This is the first ministry weakness of the church. Now, why weren't some of those other things mentioned that they had to have had problems with? Because of the influx of all those people staying way longer. He reserves the first ministry weakness noted in the first century church to this one that is close to his heart: ministry to the widow. Now, Wayne Jackson, in his commentary on the book of Acts, says that as you read chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and you keep reading about the disciples being added to and the number of the disciples multiplying, he estimates that you're probably talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 people in the church at this point in time. Now, I've never been a member of a 20,000 member church. But do you know what it would be like to be a part of a 20,000 member church? I want you to stop and think about this for a minute. Do you have any personal issues in your life? Do you have any problems? Do you know all of us have baggage? We can't see it, but we all have baggage. Some of us have been carrying baggage for years in our life because of things we've experienced. Some of us have recently acquired baggage in our life. Do you know what we are? We're a mess. We really are. We just have all kinds of personal issues. Now, when we get together at church, we're not real transparent. And so a lot of these things are very private. And so it's invisible baggage that we're carrying. Do you know what you've got when you've got 20,000 people together in a church? You've got a mass of a mess. Now, I don't know about Brother Richard, but I wouldn't want to be a preacher of a church of 20,000 people. You talk about a mess. I can't imagine what a mess that would be. 20,000 people. Human beings, all, with issues, and they have all these situations where they've not brought enough stuff to stay so long. But yet the first thing that's mentioned, that's a ministry weakness, is Acts 6, verse 1. Now in those days when the number of the disciples was multiplying, there arose a complaint against the Hebrews by the Hellenists because their widows were neglected in the daily distribution. Now, did God want that to continue? No way! And so he says, this is the kind of people that we need to appoint to take care of this particular matter. God did not want the widowed people to be neglected. God doesn't want people who are hurting to be neglected. Whether they're a foreigner or an orphan or a fatherless person, no matter what the hurt is, God wants us to be compassionate like he's compassionate and help hurting people. Now, I'm going to ask you to look at this verse that you're very familiar with. Now, imagine that you're in English class, and I'm the English teacher, and I say, class, here's a sentence. You tell me what the subject of the sentence is. Remember about subjects, and verbs, and direct objects? Remember, are any of you so old that you diagrammed sentences when you were in school? I love that. I enjoyed that. Well, what is the subject of this sentence? Now, only one word. Religion. Religion. The English word religion comes from a Latin word that means bind back again. It's very close to the concept of reconciliation in the Bible, which is about making friends again. See, sin separates us from God, but through Jesus Christ, we can be reconciled to God. Religion is not a bad thing. Religion is a good thing. Now, what kind of religion is this sentence talking about? Pure and undefiled religion. You know what that means? That means there must be impure and defiled religion. Now, let me present to you a concept that this world does not like. All religion is not right in the sight of God, period. We live in a multicultural world where we have become accepting of anything and everything. But there is right religion and there's wrong religion. Now, which one do you want to be a part of? Which one do you want to practice? We want to practice pure and undefiled religion, don't we? And we're not talking about somebody's opinion. This verse is about God's perspective. Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this. Well, what is it? Well, at the end of the verse, it says, keep oneself unspotted from the world. Well, if you have passion for God, passion for a holy God, you're going to be committed to keeping yourselves unspotted from the world. That's where right religion begins, passion for God. If you want passion for God, read Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah had the opportunity to see the Lord sitting on the throne. And he was able to hear those special three words, holy, holy, holy. And I wonder if it was a bass voice or a tenor voice. My suspicion is a bass voice. He he was blown away by the holiness of God. You know, we need to appreciate the holiness of God more. And we need to have a passion for a holy God. If you want help in staying out of the sin of the world, develop a greater passion for the holiness of God. Now, a part of that right religion is also visiting. Now, let me explain to you what that word visit means. That word visit isn't just a mere social call. That word visit has to do with looking over and observing a situation with the intention of providing for the needs in that situation. That's what that word visit is all about. It might be somebody's dishes being washed. It might be somebody's lawn being mowed. It might be you being in the presence of that person to be supportive personally of that person. It might be you taking food to them. It maybe would be you also weeping with them while they weep. Visiting is learning about somebody's situation and doing the best you can to help them. Now, who are we supposed to be doing that for? What's it say in that verse? The orphans and the widows. Okay, now in regard to the orphans, we used to have debates in the church about how to support orphans' homes. Now they're called children's homes. As a matter of fact, I'm sure you're familiar with Midwestern Children's Home. I visited on that campus before. I loved the work. There's Schultz Lewis Children's Home over in Valparaiso, Indiana. There's Potter Children's Home down in Bowling Green, Kentucky. There's North Alabama Children's Home in the Huntsville, Alabama area. Tennessee Children's Home has campuses in East Tennessee, West Tennessee, and Middle Tennessee. We are doing a great job in the Brotherhood ministering to the needs of kids who need help. They're not now fatherless or orphans. They're kids, some of them who have mental illness issues. They have personal problems because they're from dysfunctional families. They're not literally without parents. We're trying to help them because they're a mess. They're children in jeopardy, and we're compassionately trying to help them. Now, I'm also a huge fan of adoption. Is there anybody in this church or in the church where you go that has adopted a child? Do you have anybody who's adopted a child? I think that's an awesome ministry. I think that is great. You know what I think? When a couple wants to adopt a child, I was blown away when I found out how much that costs. It's sinful what that costs. It's awful. You know what I think? I think the church, we ought to volunteer to pay every dime that it costs a couple to adopt a child. If they're willing to assume that responsibility, we need to get behind them because that is a great ministry. I love to hear about fostering parenting. Foster parenting is an awesome ministry. It's compassionate ministry for kids. It's visiting kids who are in jeopardy. Now, there's a second object of the same verb. What's the second object of the verb visit? The widowed. What are we doing to minister to the widowed? I never thought about this until I lost my wife. And it blew me away. It shocked me. And I reflected back and I thought, man, have I ever missed the boat. I was not the right kind of support and help to the widowed that I could have been and should have been. It wasn't because I wasn't compassionate. It was because I didn't know what they were going through. You know when I started learning what they were going through? When I lost my wife. Then I began to experience what they were experiencing. Then I began to read everything I could get my hands on, written by people who had lost their spouse. Now I know better. It is a huge challenge. Life after loss. Living with the loss of your mate changes your life in a multitude of ways. And it is a huge struggle. What I would love for us to do in the church is recognize the great opportunities there are in ministering to people who are living with the loss of their spouse, because that is a great way of serving others. Now, the church is not the first in the line of ministry to help the widowed. The first line of ministry is the family, not the 1 Timothy chapter 5, I'm going to start reading in verse 3. Honor widows. Now, the word honor there, the Greek word means, the idea is care for. Care for widows who are really widows. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, see, there's different kinds of widowed people. There are widowed people without children and grandchildren. There are widowed people with children and grandchildren. Now he says, any widow who has children or grandchildren, let them, that is the children or grandchildren, first learn to show piety at home to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. Verse 16 of that chapter says, if any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, and do not let the church be burdened, that it may relieve those who are really widows. How in the world can children or grandchildren minister to their parents who are widowed if they don't know what their parents are going through as a widowed person? They can't. That's why we need to educate in the local church. We need to educate people about what widowhood is like so that they can better minister to their parents and grandparents. Now, verse 8, right smack dab in the middle of this passage. But if any does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, who's he talking about there? Well, the verses previous to verse 8 and the verses after verse 8 are talking about the widowed. That's what he's talking about. If anyone does not provide for his own widowed parent or grandparent, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. That's what he's talking about. In other words, this is a big deal. The first line of ministry for people who are struggling with the unique challenges of being widowed, living with the loss of their mate, is the children and the grandchildren of that widowed person. But I didn't realize that until I lost my wife. I think W.E. Vine is correct that it seems like in that passage in 1 Timothy 5, there's kind of a hint that what was going on in the first century church is families were kind of shoving their responsibility off on the local church instead of them assuming the responsibility of caring for their widowed parent or grandparent. So what are we going to do in regard to the widowed? Well, Dr. Seuss has been canceled by a lot of people in our day and age, but not by me. I think Dr. Seuss is right. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. When are we going to get better at ministering to the widow? When we start caring a whole awful lot. That's what moves us to do great things. Great compassion can lead to great effective ministry if there's a knowledge, at least an awareness, of what's going on in that other person's life. I want to challenge all of us to think more seriously, not just about ministering to the widow, but about having passion for God, an unparalleled passion for God that gives us a deep passion for people. And when we're like that, that's right religion. That's what right religion has always been about. Even in the Old Testament, what God wanted Israel to understand, what he wanted of them was passion for him and compassion for others. But you know what happened? They developed a passion for their rituals instead of a passion for God. That led them to become negligent in regard to hurting people. Passion for God leads us to compassion for people. We're going to take a break, but a much shorter break this time because we need to end at 11:30, just like I promised. So what we're going to do is, could I beg you to just maybe stand up and stretch? Give our brother Anthony time to set up the next set of slides, and we'll finish in a half an hour. So if you could just take a couple of minutes and stand up and stretch, I would appreciate it. Is Anthony around? There he is. I couldn't see his halo. Anthony, would you put your halo on so I can see you?